Good day, everyone. This is International Trade and Business that will help you look through with some vital information on government intervention and international trade. In this lesson, we'll examine why governments sometimes intervene in international trade. Look at the different policy instruments available for governments to influence the trade industry and discuss the arguments against different concepts. And before anything else, this is our team consisting of 12 members.
Now, here are some pointers to ponder. First is the international trade and business. Second is the importance of international trade. Third is the government's involvement in the economy. Fourth is the reasons why government intervenes in the international trade and the 12 reasons why. Next is how does the government intervene? Next is the trade intervention, the political and economic government intervention, the pros and cons of government intervention, and lastly, which trade has no government intervention.
Let's begin!
So what is the international trade and business?
International trade. According to our source, it is the exchange of commodities and services between countries. This sort of trading creates a global economy in which global events influence prices, supply, and demand. It is the movement of products and services between two or more countries.
Meanwhile, international business can be described as economic transactions that occur across the national borders. International business refers to any transaction involving people from diverse countries. We can say that it is the buying and selling of goods, products, and services across a country's national borders.
First, let's look at why trade is important to every nation. Nation trade is crucial because it enables each country to specialize in the commodities and services it can produce and supply most swiftly and cheaply, then trade them with other countries to generate economic growth, jobs, and greater living standards. Trade is important in international business since it refers to the exchange of goods between individuals, states, and countries. It serves as an indicator of the country's economic health. No country can thrive without an international trade since resources are finite.
This allows countries to extend their markets and gain access to products and services that might otherwise be inaccessible in their very own country. The market has become more competitive as a result of international trade. As a result, pricing becomes more competitive and consumers receive a lower cost product.
Why should the government be involved in the economy?
As we know, governments maintain legal and social framework, provide public goods and services, redistribute income, mitigate risks, and stabilize the economy. Any action taken by the government that impacts the market with the goal of affecting the free market equilibrium or result is referred to as government intervention. As a result, government involvement is required to defend society's interests and encourage true competition. The government regulates the size of monopolies and other private businesses. Monopolistic, restrictive, and unjust trading practices should also be regulated and prohibited. Likewise, keep the competitors from combining or merging.
So why do governments really intervene in trade? Governments set trade barriers and use other measures to restrict or change free commerce. Governments interfere to achieve a range of reasons, including generating profits, attaining policy objectives, and securing citizens and private enterprises. Governments employ trade and investment in this way to achieve political, social, and economic objectives. Free trade between countries has numerous advantages in terms of individual business prospects, international relations, and economic growth for entire economies.
So why would government intervene in international trade by putting up walls, taxes, and other impediments? So this is a complex subject that varies widely from country to country. Even so, there are a variety of reasons, and some are they are unexpected. So why countries intervene in international trade? We aim to provide you with a greater understanding of why government intervene in international trade and how they do so. It may sound strange yet, government frequently intervene to limit trade. So why would a government seek to impose trade restriction? If home industries cannot compete with foreign industry, the government will impose trade restrictions to aid the development of indigenous businesses. Governments may also impose this in order to encourage domestic enterprise rather than exporting it. These measures stimulate high prices and aid the development of the home industry.
Moving forward, we have here some specific reasons why. Number 1. National security. To safeguard this national security, each country protects certain industries. Weapons, aerospace, advanced electronics, semiconductors, and strategic minerals are all apparent examples. Protection for the sake of making certain minerals or resources available does not appear to be the best approach. A preferable option is to preserve such materials during times of peace when they are less expensive. According to the International Trade Administration of the United States Department of Commerce, in addition to compliance with international treaties and commitments, the Philippine legislation regulates the importation of some commodities for national security, environmental and public health protection, and order and morality. Items prohibited include used clothing and rugs, toy guns, right-hand drive vehicles, hazardous waste even in transit into Philippine territory, laundry and industrial detergents containing hard surfactants, polychlorinated biphenyls, used motorcycle parts except engine, and live piranha, shrimp, and prawns.
Number 2. Foreign policy goals. Commerce has evolved into a key tool for achieving foreign policy objectives. A country or countries with which strong relations are to be formed and may be granted preferential treatment. For this condition, may we provide you this situation. When Pakistan was paid for allowing the US to use their air base during the Afghan conflict. Following its invasion of Kuwait, Iraq was penalized by trade sanctions. Governments may impose export restrictions on strategic products, even to friendly countries, to ensure that they do not fall into the hands of prospective adversaries. Because of this, the US government restricts US companies from exporting sophisticated encryption technologies. To prevent another country from assisting the enemy, restrictions on non-defense items may be implemented.
Number 3. Safety. In order to improve public safety, the United States prohibited the import of 58 types of military-style assault weapons permanently in 1978. Meanwhile, Chile banned the import of salmon eggs, claiming that they were diseased. Furthermore, to safeguard its citizens from the potential health risks, the EU banned the import of hormone-treated beef. And as a result of China's SARS crisis, numerous countries has transferred their garments order to India and Pakistan. Moreover, the Indian government was undecided about whether or not to authorize the use of genetically modified cotton seeds. Lastly, patients' interests are protected in medical services through the enforcement of qualifying criteria for medical physicians and others.
And when it comes to requirements for labeling or marking, the Philippine Consumer Act or Republic Act No. 7394 and Philippine National Standards specify the marking and labeling regulations or the PNS. The Bureau of Philippine Standards or the BPS of the Department of Trade and Industry is the national standards organization that produces and executes the PNS.
Meanwhile, consumer products sold in the United States must include the following information on their labels, whether they are created locally or imported.
First, trade name or brand name that is correct and registered. Second, trademark registration. Third, demarker, importer, or repacker of the consumer product's registered business name and address in the Philippines. Fourth, substances in general or active ingredients. Fifth, net content quality in terms of weight. And lastly, if imported, the country of manufacture.
Number 4. Emotional argument. Many arguments may lack economic logic, yet they are so compelling that no reasoning can overcome them. The argument for preserving cultural identity and legacy has been quite persuasive. Countries sometimes prohibit the imports of goods and services that could jeopardize their national character. As an illustration, the French government defends its film industry by banning foreign films on French television and providing financial assistance to French filmmakers. Many democratic governments raise the specter of human rights to construct restrictions. Due to its dismal human rights record, China has been denied Most Favored Nation designation for a long time. Other times, restrictions are imposed on a country in order to oppose child labor. Imposition of trade restrictions has sometimes been motivated by environmental concerns. Many nationalists and patriots says that international trade will result in a wealth transfer from locals to foreigners, since locals will receive no value in exchange.
Number 5. Protecting infant industries. Tariffs and other kinds of government intervention are frequently used to shield newly established local enterprises from international competitors providing similar items at lower rates. These rates encourage customers to support local businesses and provide emerging enterprises with the time and resources they need to get started. Other sources say that many startups in the United Kingdom would fail if there were no tariffs on international goods, and unemployment would almost certainly rise. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 increased tariffs on agriculture imports as well as more than 20,000 other foreign goods. The tariff were the second highest in the United States history. The goal was to assist American farmers who had been hammered especially hard by the Great Depression according to the CFI.
Now, let's dive on import and tariff. With the accordance from ITA, the Philippines adopted the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature 2017 edition or AHTN. In 2019, the Philippines Simple Average Applicable Most Favored Nation or MFN tariff rate was 6.1%. In 2019, the Philippines Simple Average MFN applicable tariff rate for agricultural products was 9.8%. And for non-agricultural items, it was 5.5%. With a simple average final bound tariff rate of 25.7%, the Philippines bounded 66.9% of its tariff lines in the World Trade Organization, or WTO. Imported manufactured items that compete with locally produced goods typically face higher tariffs than those that do not. To protect local manufacturers, the Philippines cites domestic and global economic events to justify the revisions of imposed duty rates for particular products. Under the ASEAN Free Trade Area or AFTA agreement, the Philippines abolished tariffs on nearly all imports from ASEAN trading partners.
Number 6. National defense. Most governments make an attempt to safeguard their own sectors of the economy that provide services important to national defense and security, whether they are at peace or at war, in order to defend and secure home production of various items and services. A government may apply high tariffs. Weapons, advanced electronics, Aerospace and strategic minerals are all obvious examples. For example, if China, a national security and military threat to U.S. regional influence, were to dump steel in the U.S. market to gain a military advantage, the logical thing for the U.S. government to do would be to encourage Chinese imports rather than U.S. exports, according to President Trump economic advisor Peter Navarro, because steel is a limited resource, shipping it outside diminishes the stock of steel in the United States, but importing it increases it.
If China is dumping, it means that the product is being transported to the US rather than being used in Chinese markets. For every unit of steel sent to the US, there is one fewer unit available for a Chinese war machine and one more available for a US war machine. The logical course of action for the US government will be to buy a lot of cheap steel from China and stockpile it, depriving China of our supplies while increasing US steel stockpiles. In the case of a war, the US will be able to draw from a considerable stockpile where areas China's will be diminished.
Number 7. Employment rates. No country wants its unemployment rates to rise because it will increase crime and public displeasure. Governments should focus on building an environment that supports high levels of employment while also providing new job possibilities on a regular basis. This supports economic growth and keep the economy healthy. If a government's home economy is failing to compete with worldwide competitors, tariffs may be imposed to redirect consumer attention to local firms, insulating and protecting the domestic economy from outside competition.
Number 8. Environmental concerns. Particular governments may impose tariffs on products they believe are environmentally hazardous or do not meet certain environmental criteria. Because of the environmentally unpleasant nature of importing and exporting commodities, imports may be subject to some type of environmental tariff.
Let's take a look at this case from Bureau of Customs, also known as BOC. When they recently seized and declared shipments containing black ants concealed in 396 specimen tubes into separate incidents. The Bureau of Customs for the Ninoy Aquino International Airport in a statement recently said some 396 black ants were confiscated in 2 separate occasions.
On February 4, 2 undeclared import shipments from Poland containing harmful black ants that were concealed in 396 specimen tubes were confiscated. 3 export shipments, which were misdeclared as Lego bricks but actually contained 21 small cups and 21 specimen tubes containing assorted black ants, were also confiscated on January 24. The shipments were bound for France, Singapore, and Italy and were sent by a certain Shinyap.
Moreover, and according to Inquirer webpage, the seized black ants were immediately turned over to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and were subjected to seizure and forfeiture proceedings for violation of RA 9147, otherwise known as Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, and RA 10863, also known as the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act.
Number 9. Aggressive trade. International competitors may utilize highly aggressive trade practices such as flooding the market in many circumstances. Domestic dealers may be forced out of business as multinational traders get a footing in the market share. Aggressive business practices can strike suddenly and without notice. To safeguard their economy from this type of aggressive trade conduct, governments must erect barriers.
When looking at a country's list of banned and restricted imported goods, you'll note that the majority of the things included are harmful, such as guns, knives, and other weapons. In order to protect customers from unwholesome consumptions, certain animal products, as well as products derived from endangered animals such as ivory, jewelry, are frequently prohibited. Let us look at this case for illustration purposes. When BOC intercepts guns and ammo at NAIA last July 2019. This was imported from Hong Kong, which is misdeclared as general merchandise.
The Bureau of Customs Port of Naia District Office scored anew in its enhanced anti-smuggling initiatives as it intercepted 35 pieces of rifle parts, 1 Glock pistol, 4 units of Glock magazines, 92 pieces of live ammunition and airgun rifle on July 1, July 4, and July 7, 2019 from a DHL warehouse in Pasay City. The illegally imported parts from Hong Kong discovered in DHL warehouse were misdeclared as general merchandise, while the pistol and pistol parts bound for Taiwan were misdeclared as new water pump. In the same warehouse, the abandoned goods that were examined on July 7, 2019 also yielded an airgun rifle and 4 other pieces of airgun accessories and gun parts from China.
Under Sections 119, 1400s, and 1113 of Republic Act No. 10863 or Customs Modernization and Tariff Act, and Republic Act No. 10591 or Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Act, the import and export of guns, gun part, and ammunition without proper clearance from the government would be subject to seizure and forfeiture. There's also the possibility that some animal products are infected, and importing them could result in an outbreak. In 2021, we must use extreme caution in this regard.
The Philippines has temporarily decreased pork tariff rates and raised quota volume in response to rising pork prices caused by African swine fever's catastrophic impact on the hog sector. Executive Order 134 was published on May 15, year 2021, lowering pork tariffs from the original 30% in quota and 40% out quota rates according to the professional pig community.
Medical drugs. Each country will have its own list of which medical drugs require a doctor prescription and which can be purchased without one. This list will vary by country, depending what health professional considered to be safe. Bans and tariffs on medication are frequently imposed in order to prevent overdosing and inappropriate intake of medical drugs, especially prescription drugs, particularly for individual orders and use.
For this scenario, we have a case from the Bureau of Customs when they intercepted 2,000 capsules of undeclared ivermectin and other undeclared regulated drugs. The shipment was imported from New Delhi, India, and was declared as food supplements, multivitamins, and multimineral capsules. And Finstead Incorporation was identified as the importer.
Now that we've explored several cases for government intervention in international trade, let's move on to some interesting topics. Why do governments, particularly in developing economies, intervene in trade and investment activities?
Governments intervene in commerce for a variety of reasons, including political, economic, social, and cultural. A country's government may aim to preserve jobs or certain industries on a political level. Governments, on the other hand, may use trade to reward a country for political support on global issues.
How does the government intervene with trade?
Tariffs, which protect home sectors from foreign competition by raising the cost of imported goods through a tax, are one of the many tools that governments can use to influence trade. Tariffs benefit the home country because they increase revenue. One disadvantage of tariffs is that they cause customers in the domestic market to pay more for imports. Low-interest loans, tax breaks, and cash transfers are examples of subsidies.
In the Philippines, for example, meat inflation climbed slightly from 16% in July 2021 to 16.4% in August 2021. However, meat inflation dropped to 0.4% month-over-month, indicating some price stabilization. Following the issuing of Executive Order Numbers 133 and 134, retail prices of frozen and fresh pork have reduced by roughly 19 pesos to 38 pesos per kilo from their peak. Following the issuing of Executive Order Number 135, rice inflation remained negative at 0.4% year-on-year. The executive orders adjust and reduce the most favored nation tariff rates on rice, as well as modify the rates on import duty on fresh, chilled, or frozen pork meat.
How could a government intervene to protect its local firms?
Government subsidies in the form of lump sum payments or low-interest loans are sometimes granted to local businesses that are unable to compete effectively against foreign imports. These subsidies are supposed to guard local jobs and assist local businesses in adopting the global markets.
How does government intervention affect the supply and demand equilibrium?
The government makes subsidies to incentivize the development of items or services that it sees as significant to society or as a need for customers. A subsidy shifts the supply curve right, lowering the equilibrium price and raising the equilibrium quantity. Wind farms are an example of a government subsidy.
So now, let's talk about some examples and types of interventions.
What are trade interventions? In other words, the goal of trade intervention is to boost domestic employment by appropriating foreign demand, which raises the national savings rate regardless of whether or not the cultural predisposition to save has changed.
What are the government interventions?
When a government declares itself to be a rulemaker or market regulator, it is required to interfere deeply in transaction disputes between market players, mobilizing public or private resources to address the transaction disputes as part of the market governance process. Tariffs on imports are arguably the most prevalent technique for governments to meddle in international trade. An import tariff is a very specific tax imposed on certain imported commodities, causing these goods to cost higher and disturbing international trade equilibrium.
According to Real Business, most countries impose prohibitions and limitations on some products in addition to tariffs. When compared to harsher companies, the UK has very few prohibitions and tariffs. Weapons, illicit substances, road diamonds, and a few other items mentioned on the banned and restricted commodities list are not allowed to be imported. Quota systems, tariffs, and subsidies are the three basic tools used by the governments to limit commerce. A quota system restricts the number of commodities that can be imported into a country. Quota systems enable governments to limit the amount of goods imported in order to preserve native industry, while tariffs are the charges that are levied on imported goods. Tariffs raise the price consumers pay for a good, lowering demand and bringing the price closer to the charge by the domestic producers. The government or the growing industries may benefit from the tariff profit.
Subsidies, however, are financial aid given to domestic businesses to help them grow and compete with international competitors. Domestic producers can charge lower prices because of subsidies, rather than losing money due to outside assistance. Furthermore, we wanted to discuss today two forms of government intervention when it comes to international trade. The first one is the political government intervention. There are numerous political arguments for trade intervention. Let's take a look at each one individually. The first political motivation is to safeguard employment and industries from international competition. For example, if countries were free to flood the Philippine market with sugar, domestic producers would suffer. If sugar could be acquired cheaper in continuous amounts, jobs in the sugar businesses as a whole could be destroyed.
The protection of national security is another important political rationale for government interference in commerce. In this case, sugar will not be classified, but any defense-related industries such as semiconductors or aerospace will be. Political retaliation as part of a foreign strategy will be a more spiteful rationale for intervention. When the United States developed tension with a foreign country over terrorism sponsorship or the management of an international crisis, for example, one tool in the government's inventory is to impose trade restrictions that could harm the country's economy. The second one is the economic government intervention.
For economic reasons, governments also intervene in trade policy. One of the most compelling reasons is to safeguard emerging sectors from intense competition. This is especially crucial for developing country industries which may not be able to compete with larger nations. One issue with this philosophy is that shielding young industries might lead to inefficient organizations that are unprepared to compete with the global marketplace. Due to tariff barriers and quotas, Brazil was able to create the world's 10th largest auto sector as a result of protectionism. Unfortunately, when those protectionist measures were abolished, Brazil's international imports skyrocketed, and the auto sector was unable to compete with the products of its competitors. The final economic rationale for government intervention is based on strategic trade strategy, which claims that without the government action, only a few major global enterprises would survive due to economies of scale. Many economists are concerned that such involvement may harm companies that are first to market with a new product. Many economists also believes that a government that advocates for a domestic corporation to retain control of an industry is behaving selfishly and will harm global competitors and the global economy.
Let us now discuss the advantages and disadvantages of these interventions we have encountered with the help of economic help organization and other external resources.
What are the benefits of government intervention?
There are numerous benefits to government intervention, including equitable income distribution, no social inequality, secure public goods and services, property rights, and welfare possibilities for the poor. Government involvement, on the other hand, may have a few drawbacks according to some economists. For our number one, we have equality. There will almost certainly be tremendous inequality and poverty in a free market. This could be due to unfair benefits of circumstance rather than a meritocracy or inherited wealth and superior education. Governments can step in to provide a basic safety net, such as unemployment benefits and a minimum income for sick and disabled people. This improves net economic welfare and allows people to escape the harshest forms of poverty. Government involvement can also help to prevent societal unrest caused by severe inequality.
The second one is public services. Because there is no financial incentive for businesses to create items that people can enjoy for free, public goods are rarely provided in a free market. Governments can fund national defense, law enforcement, and other services through general taxes. Environmental protection is also a public good. There are an increasing number of challenges that require government intervention, such as forest fires, rising sea levels, and pressure on water resources. Next, we have education. Because consumers underestimate their personal benefits and/or neglect the external benefits, merit goods are underconsumed in the free market. As a result, healthcare and education are underfunded. Government action in the form of free education can significantly improve the quality of life for educated individuals. There are other beneficial externalities to society as well. Labor productivity and economic growth can both benefit from a well-educated population.
The fourth one will be shift consumer behavior. Consumption of deplorable goods such as alcohol, cigarettes, and opiates can result in both personal and social costs. For example, as crime. If the government discover harmful commodities, it can use higher taxes, advertising campaigns, and a behavioral economic to gradually modify consumer behavior, such as making smokes difficult to buy with ugly packs. Long-term government's program to discourage smoking in the United Kingdom and the United States have been successful in lowering smoking rates, which has contributed to extending life expectancy. Then we have environment. The environment is an area where government intervention is critical. The free market ignores the environmental consequences of doing businesses. It also overlooks the importance of long-term planning. Market factors, for example, may lead to the combustion of fossil fuels, which is causing significant environmental concern around the world, which will only become worse in the future. Given the possible cost to future generations, government intervention is required to change behavior toward renewable energy sources that do not result in these environmental costs. Furthermore, there are many changes in the environmental where private ownership does not apply. If pollution results in deteriorating air quality, it impacts everyone on the earth, but market systems do not provide a way to address the problem. You may sue someone who pollutes your backyard but who takes action if air pollution deteriorates.
For number 6, you have powerful monopoly. Firms can obtain monopoly power in a free market, allowing them to charge high prices to consumers and pay lower wages to workers. This leads to increased inequality and welfare waste. Increased economic welfare may result from government involvement to limit mergers and monopolistic power. And last but not the least is infrastructure strategic planning. Another pre-market constraint is underinvestment in quasi-public products like roads and railways. This may result in transportation congestion. Governments can plan for future transportation trends and invest in the necessary roads and trains. So let's move on to what makes the government intervention unfavorable. The first in the list will be revenue. Developing countries in particular frequently lack the institutional infrastructure required to effectively impose income or company taxes. Because taxes on imported commodities are generally easy to administer, governments in such countries may use them to fund their activities. However, the quantity of tax money that may be obtained by tariffs is always restricted. If the government seeks to raise tariff collection by imposing higher duty rates, it may stifle the flow of imports, reducing rather than raising tariff revenue.
The next one will be the economic development for the protection of domestic industry. The most prevalent justification for tariffs is that certain domestic industries require tariff protection to survive. Theories of comparative advantage will naturally argue that the industry in need of such protection should not exist, and that the resources used should be diverted to vocations with higher comparative efficiency. Citizens' welfare gains would more than offset the welfare losses of those groups impacted by import competition, resulting in an increase in total real national income. However, an opposing argument would be that this welfare increase would be widely dispersed, and that the individual beneficiaries would be unaware of any significant improvement. In contrast, the loss of well-being would be felt locally and acutely. Although resources can be shifted to other occupations, as suggested by comparative advantage theory, the process can be slow and painful for individuals who are being transferred. For these reasons, comparative advantage theorists rarely recommend eliminating all existing tariffs immediately. Instead, they advocate for progressive reductions in import barriers, arguing that subsequent tariff hikes, if effective, will lure even more resources to the incorrect occupation.
The third one is unemployment. Tariffs or quotas are also occasionally recommended as a means of preserving domestic employment, particularly during recessions. Modern economies, on the other hand, are nearly unanimous in their belief that efforts to reduce unemployment through tariffs increases are wrong. In the case where a higher tariff is effective for this aim, it simply exports unemployment, meaning that the increase in domestic employment is matched by a decrease in production in some other country. Furthermore, that other country is likely to respond with a tariff rise. Finally, The tariff cure for unemployment is ineffective most of the time, and there are more appropriate remedies available. It is now widely acknowledged that implementing adequate fiscal and monetary policies is significantly more effective in reducing unemployment. The fourth one is national defense. A common argument made by a business seeking tariff or quota relief is that its survival is critical to the national interest. Its product would be required during a period of war when imports would be shut off. Economists' conclusion on this issue is very clear. The national defense argument is typically a misleading herring, an attempt to wrap oneself in the flag, and the tariff is a problematic means of assuring an industry's survival inasmuch as it is essential. Instead, economists argue that important sectors should be granted a direct subsidy to help them compete against international competition, with explicit awareness that the subsidy is a price paid by the nation to keep the business alive for defense purposes.
Then we have the government blunders. The term government failure refers to how government action can exacerbate problems. For instance, the government may make decisions based on short-term political considerations that result in efficiency. For example, tariffs imposed by the government to safeguard domestic industry can lead to a trade war, causing the economy to decline.
For the sixth one, we can call it lack of incentives. Individuals in the free market have a profit motivation to innovate and lower expenses, but this incentive does not exist in the public sector. It may result in efficient production. State-owned industries, for example, have a history of being inefficient, overstaffed, and producing commodities that are not in demand by consumers.
The seventh one is political lobbying organizations. There is nothing as permanent as a temporary government bailout, said Milton Friedman, alluding to agricultural subsidies. Introduced in the 1930s to help farmers out of a slump during the Great Depression. No government dared to reduce subsidies after the World War II because farmers were a formidable lobbying bloc that wanted to maintain the subsidies. The second to the last of our cons is less options. Government interference in the economy, for example, nationalization of industries, is frequently linked to a reduction in choice or options. The monopoly on government-produced services exists because the government selected what to create and command economies that has little option. Economic freedom and the ability to maximize individual welfare rely heavily on choice and options. But not all government intervention results in fewer options.
And the last one would be personal liberty has an impact. Government intervention is becoming more prevalent in efforts to change customer behavior, such as lowering traffic congestion and improving health by reducing smoking rates and encouraging a better lifestyle. Taxes, behavioral pressures, and regulations are all part of this. These can sometimes feel oppressive to people's own choices.
And to sum up our discussion, may we give you an interesting question to ponder at.
Which trade has no government intervention? Without government involvement, a free market is one in which voluntary exchange and the principles of supply and demand provide the sole basis for the economic system. The absence of compelled or forced transactions or transaction conditions is a major feature of free markets, according to Investopedia webpage.
Should a government intervene in trade? Without government action, businesses can use their monopoly position to pay workers low wages and charge consumers expensive prices. We are likely to see monopoly power develop without government action. As a result, Government involvement can encourage higher income equality, which is regarded as more equitable.
So that's it, everyone. That concludes our discussion. Once again, this is group number 3. Thank you for your time and consideration today.
See ya!